Hello, today I am going to talk about project-based learning, otherwise known as PBL. What is project-based learning? Project-based learning is when students learn by actively participating in real-life meaningful projects. So this is more than just having students do a project. This is when students are doing projects that are meaningful to their real lives and teach them valuable skills that they will need for the rest of their lives. So not just having students do a project and then that's it. They should be learning things through this project by actively participating and finding out knowledge for themselves through this project. Through this process, learning comes alive. Students are doing this information for themselves, and so it's not just me telling them what to know. It's them finding out for themselves and learning for themselves. So learning will come alive through this process. Another thing is students work on a project over a period of time, extending from 1 week to a semester. So as you can see, this can be a bit time-consuming depending on what project-based learning you are wanting to do. But it is valuable and will teach the students skills they will need to know for the rest of their lives. And hopefully, if it is done right, the information will stick with them the rest of their lives. There are a lot of pros of project-based learning. These are just to name a few of the pros of project-based learning. The first one is students develop deep content knowledge. So through this process, students will not just be told the information, they're going to learn it for themselves, and through that, students will develop a lot deeper of a knowledge. I remember when I was in school, when I actually did a project, it was always something that stuck with me a bit more. And so this is even deeper because not only are they doing a project on it, they're finding out information for themselves. So they will know the information extremely well by the end of project-based learning. Another pro is that students develop critical thinking skills. So students will they're going to face problems, they're going to have to think about that problem, and they're going to have to come to a solution about that problem. And so through this, students will develop very good critical thinking abilities that will be beneficial to them. And lastly, students develop creativity. So students will have to be creative, design a well-looking project, and so they will develop creativity. It will have to look nice, and they're going to have to design something, and anytime you design something, you develop creativity or creative abilities. There are some cons of project-based learning. It requires a lot of time. I've already somewhat discussed this, but it can be time-consuming. You will need to carve out a good amount of time if you are going to do project-based learning. Another con is teachers will need to maintain order in the classroom. If teachers are not used to doing this, it can be hard because students are mostly doing things by themselves. So teachers will need to monitor the classroom and make sure students are staying on task. It can be easy for students to get off task when they are doing things on their own. I remember this when I was in school. A lot of times when students are doing their own thing, it can be easy to get sidetracked or for students to goof around. And so teachers need to make sure that they are maintaining order in the classroom and that students are staying on task. Another thing is it can be a hard transition from the traditional classroom. A lot of teachers are used to teaching information, and it can be hard to take away that control and that structure and change it into project-based learning. It is very different from the traditional classroom. And so it may be hard for for teachers to do that. And so there will be a transition time. Lastly, another project-based learning con is that technology is very helpful. So if your school is not very technology inclined, it can be hard to do project-based learning because a lot of it involves doing things on the internet or research, and it involves designing something, and a lot of those things are just easier and useful if they're done through technology because, in general, students are going to need technology in their day-to-day lives as adults and as professionals. And so if you're wanting to get the most of project-based learning, it is helpful to have technology, just because that is what students are more than likely going to use in their professional career. How is project-based learning different from a project? So, I've already somewhat talked about this in previous slides, but the number one way that project-based learning is different than just doing a project is the fact that it isn't just me going through a unit and then the students have to do a project based on that unit. The students are learning the unit for themselves. The unit is the project-based learning. So students will need to use critical thinking, and they are going to need to use collaboration skills, and they're going to need to come up with the information on their own with some help from me, but they are doing the majority of it. It's very different from just me teaching something and then them doing it after the unit. It's during the unit. That is the unit. And so that is the biggest difference between project-based learning and just doing a project. Both can be helpful in the classroom. It's just one involves more critical thinking abilities and more collaboration skills. There are 7 essential design elements that students are going to need to use to do project-based learning. So the first one is sustained inquiry. So students will need to find resources and apply that information. So they're going to need to do the research and apply whatever information they find to their project. And this can take time. This is not just a one-time thing. They're going to have to keep finding resources and apply that information, because as they come across problems, as they're designing it and may think of a better way, maybe a way to make it better, they're going to have to keep finding resources and applying information and doing inquiry. Another thing is that they're going to have to answer challenging problems or questions. Things are going to come up and they're going to have to think about how can I make this better? How can I design this? And so they're going to have to deal with challenging problems and questions that may arise. Another essential design element is public product. The students who are going to design a product that they could show to other people. They could even bring this outside the classroom and show it maybe to someone who might want that product if it's good enough. And so it's not just about designing a product, it's a product they can show to others. Another essential design element is authenticity. It involves real-world context and it piques students' interest. It's not just doing something for the sake of doing it. It's actually an interest to the student, and it is something the student uses in the real world. It should involve student voice and choice, so it should actually be the student's choice. It needs to be useful for the unit, but the student should have some choice in it, and it should be the student's work. It should have the student's voice in it. The student should develop a voice through the process. There should be a reflection period where the student can look at their work and reflect on how it could be better. And lastly, there should be critique and revision. So the teacher will critique the work and the student will critique the work, and through those critiques the student can revise it to make it better. And so the student is constantly, throughout the whole process, looking at their work and thinking of how it can be better and how it can be useful in the real world. So this isn't just doing a project. It should be something that is very useful and something that will help the student in their professional career one day. There are also 7 project-based teaching practices. So the project must align to standards. So this is more obvious, but the teacher must have the standards that the students need to know. There are standards students need to know, and so those need to be shown through the project so that it's useful and so that you're still meeting the guidelines. A teacher should build culture, so they should promote independence and growth. So it shouldn't be the teacher taking over the project or anything like that. The student should be independent, and they should be going through this process. There should be a design and a plan, so there should be a way that this project needs to be done and some sort of probably rubric so that there is a plan in place. There should manage activities, so there should be a schedule or calendar so that students are staying on task so that we don't get behind, because to a teacher, time is very precious. You only get so much of it. And so we don't want to fall behind. We need to stay on task and stay on the schedule so that we are not wasting time and helping students to stay on that time schedule, because it can be very easy to take too long on projects, especially project-based learning projects, because they are very time consuming and they are very much critical thinking things through, and designing a very good project. So the teacher should also engage and coach. The teacher should help the student when the student needs help, encourage them, give them praise, but also if there's something that is maybe not the best it can be, the teacher can help the student with that and make it better. Another thing is the teacher can assess student learning, so there should be some level of grading, and the teacher can assess the student learning. And lastly, there should be scaffolding. The teacher should help students reach project goals. There are goals that need to be accomplished. Some of those are they need to have key knowledge, they need to develop understanding, and they need to develop skills that will help them later in life, like critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. All of these elements are very useful for a student, and so the teacher should help students develop these abilities. So that is just a very basic idea of project-based learning to help students develop a good project that they can use later in life. And as I look at this, I can see a lot of useful elements that are really going to help the students become better learners, better professionals one day, and that will really help them not just know knowledge, but actually take part in the knowledge. And so I think this can be a very useful skill for students to know and to develop critical thinking abilities, to develop creativity, to develop collaboration skills. And so I think this would be a good thing for teachers to use if they have the time. And so these are my resources, and that is that. So thank you for listening.